The girl on the auction block that Samuel McKinnon bid $50 for in Galveston seemed more like a calculating shopkeeper than a frightened child, her eyes methodically assessing each potential buyer. It was 1887, and drought had pushed the McKinnons' West Texas ranch to ruin. Martha's empty arms ached for the children her barren womb denied her, while Samuel's desperation for cheap labor had brought him to this sordid auction house where children were sold like cattle. When the girl, Rebecca according to her lot number card, met Samuel's gaze, something passed between them. Recognition, perhaps, of something worth salvaging. In the audience, a well-dressed man made notes in a leather ledger, marking down McKinnon's name with particular interest after the sale concluded. On the long journey home, Rebecca's first words surprised them both. "I know cattle and numbers. I can help." Martha's hardened heart stirred despite herself. Perhaps $50 hadn't been wasted after all. What would you do if you found yourself at a crossroads between buying into an evil system and potentially saving someone? Samuel and Martha McKinnon face this moral dilemma as they purchase Rebecca to rescue her from exploitation, not knowing how she'll transform their lives. Have you ever made a difficult choice that seemed wrong, but ultimately led to something beautiful? Share your thoughts below. And if you're captivated by this tale of chosen family and second chances in the harsh Texas frontier, follow for the full story of the McKinnon miracle, where the family you choose can heal the deepest wounds. Martha McKinnon's fingers traced the edge of the empty cradle, then withdrew as if the smooth wood had scorched her skin. Through the cabin window, West Texas spread before her, parched and barren as her womb. The summer of 1887 had baked the land mercilessly, each rainless day another nail in their ranch's coffin. "Martha?" Samuel's voice carried from the doorway, cautious as a man crossing thin ice. "I've gone through the ledger again." She didn't turn. "And?" "Henderson's place sold yesterday. Third ranch this month." Samuel stepped into the room, his boots leaving dust trails on the plank floor. "At this rate, we won't make it through winter." The silence between them had weight, accumulated from years of disappointments, failed pregnancies, failed rains, failed dreams. Martha smoothed her apron, a gesture of composure when she felt none. "The auction in Galveston," Samuel said finally. "They say you can get labor for next to nothing." Now she did turn, eyes flashing. "So we become like them, buying people to work our land." "We buy a contract, Martha, legal and proper." Samuel's weathered face showed the strain of their situation, every line a furrow of worry, every crease a calculation of survival. "It's that or lose everything." Outside, their few remaining cattle lowed weakly by the dried creek bed. Once they'd run 300 head. Now barely 30 remained, ribs showing through dull hides. Martha looked at the cradle again, the one she'd carved herself during her third pregnancy, before the bleeding came, the one that had never held a child. "Do what you must," she said, voice flat as the dusty horizon. "But don't expect me to welcome your purchase with open arms." Samuel nodded, counting the meager coins in their lockbox. Barely $50 remained between them and ruin. $50 to save everything or lose it all trying. The Galveston auction house reeked of unwashed bodies and desperation. Samuel stood at the back, hat clutched in calloused hands, stomach churning at the spectacle before him. Children lined the platform, numbered tags hanging from necks like cattle at market. Most stared at their feet or into middle distance with the vacant expression of the already defeated. Except one, lot number 317. A girl of perhaps 14, thin, but straight-backed. While other children cowered, her eyes moved methodically across the crowd, assessing each face with the precision of someone taking inventory. When the auctioneer grabbed her arm to display her to buyers, she didn't flinch. Instead, her gaze intensified, calculating something Samuel couldn't fathom. Lot 17, female, 14 years, strong back, unbroken spirit, though that can be remedied. The auctioneer's laugh rippled through the crowd. Experienced in household and field work, starting bid $30. God forgive me for being here, Samuel muttered, sweat dampening his collar despite the relatively cool coastal air. A portly man beside him spat tobacco juice on the floor. Wouldn't waste money on that one. Look at those eyes. Too much thinking going on. Samuel watched as the girl subtly counted the bidders under her breath, her fingers twitching almost imperceptibly with each new offer. She wasn't panicking. She was tallying. $40, called a hard-faced woman in front. The girl's eyes narrowed slightly, something like recognition crossing her features as she studied her potential buyer. Before Samuel could consider his actions, his hand rose. $50. The auctioneer's gavel fell with finality. Sold to the gentleman in the back. Lot 317 to McKinnon for $50. From across the room, a well-dressed man made a careful notation in a leather ledger. The wagon creaked beneath them, each rotation of the wheels carrying them further into the Texas vastness. Rebecca, that was her name, according to the papers Samuel had signed, sat in the back, maintaining a precise distance from both McKinnons, 3 feet from Martha, 4 from Samuel. Close enough to hear orders, far enough to avoid a sudden blow. Her wrists bore the faint marks of rope, though she kept them tucked beneath the single dress she owned. $50 for a child. Martha's voice cut through the afternoon heat. What were you thinking, Samuel? You didn't see her there, like a person being sold as a thing. Samuel kept his eyes on the trail, hands tight on the reins. And that makes us better, buying her instead of someone else. We can give her something better. A chance. Rebecca watched the exchange without expression, mentally mapping their route, noting landmarks, calculating distances. She'd done this before, sold, transported, calculating odds of survival with new owners. Her third sale in 2 years. How long to the ranch? She asked suddenly, her voice startling them both with its clarity and unexpected depth. Martha turned, studying the girl properly for the first time. You speak when spoken to in this household. Rebecca nodded once, accepting the parameter. Then, after exactly 11 seconds, I can cook, clean, figure sums, no cattle. Samuel glanced back, surprise evident. You worked ranches before? Yes, sir. 3. Drought killed 2. Men with papers took me from the 3rd. Martha's eyes narrowed. Men with papers? Mr. Wardell arranges transfers when owners can't pay debts. Rebecca's voice remained factual, emotionless. He owns many contracts. As the wagon crested a rise, Rebecca catalogued the dusty spread below, the struggling ranch that would be her new prison. Or perhaps, if she calculated correctly, something else entirely. Dawn found Rebecca standing precisely at the corner of the McKinnon's kitchen, back straight, hands folded, eyes lowered. Martha entered to find the girl waiting exactly where she'd been told to be, at exactly the time specified. You're punctual, at least, Martha said, stoking the cook stove with practiced movements. Yes, ma'am. The kitchen, like the rest of the small ranch house, spoke of better days, the good china cabinet now half empty, the once polished table showing wear. Martha worked with the efficiency of a woman who'd spent years stretching meals and mending what couldn't be replaced. Breakfast at 5, dinner at noon, supper after chores. You'll sleep in the back room." Martha gestured to a narrow doorway. "The wash needs doing today. Water's scarce, so use it twice. Linens first, then floors." "Yes, ma'am." Rebecca's eyes moved constantly, cataloging everything: the number of plates, the arrangement of tools, the contents of the pantry, visible through a half-open door. "The north pasture needs clearing. Rock piles growing by the fence line." Rebecca nodded, then asked unexpectedly, "How many head of cattle remaining, ma'am?" Martha turned, surprise briefly replacing her guarded expression. 28? Why? Feed calculation. Current grazing insufficient for 28. Martha's eyes narrowed. "You said you know cattle?" 3 ranches before. Similar conditions." Rebecca's gaze fell on a faded family portrait, partially turned down on a side table, a younger Samuel and Martha, smiling. Martha quickly moved to right the frame, then stepped back. "Show me what you can do first. Words mean nothing without work behind them." As they moved through the ranch's morning routine, Martha couldn't help noticing how the girl followed instructions with perfect recall, anticipating the next step in each task before it was mentioned. Not just obedient, observant, perhaps dangerously so. Samuel spread the ranch ledger across his desk, the afternoon light filtering through dust-streaked windows. 3 years of declining numbers told a story of slow death. Cattle lost, wells dried, debts mounting. "Feed won't last another month," he muttered, running calloused fingers through graying hair. "Incorrect calculation, sir." Samuel startled. Rebecca stood in the doorway, a stack of freshly laundered linens in her arms. "What did you say?" "Your figures." She set down the linens and approached, keeping the desk between them. "May I show you?" Curious despite himself, Samuel turned the ledger toward her. Rebecca's fingers traced the columns with surprising confidence. Current feed allocation assumes summer grass. Using rotation method and night grazing, consumption drops 20%. She made quick notations in the margin with precise small figures. 36 days becomes 43. Samuel stared at the calculations. "I've been ranching 15 years, girl." "Yes, sir." Her eyes moved to the property map pinned to the wall. "Limestone shelf there means water trapped underneath. 6 feet down, approximately." "How could you possibly know that?" "Worked 3 ranches before. Similar formations." Rebecca studied the map further. "Creek doesn't reach south pasture, but underground flow would." From the doorway, Martha watched silently, her knuckles white against the doorframe. The girl spoke with quiet certainty, her knowledge unexpected and unsettling. "You telling me there's water we haven't found?" Samuel's skepticism battled with desperate hope. Rebecca traced a finger along the map. "Here, where juniper grows but mesquite doesn't." Sign of shallow water table. Martha stepped forward. "Samuel, you can't possibly believe—" "What have we got to lose, Martha?" Samuel's eyes held a glimmer of the determination that had once built their ranch from nothing. "Accept everything?" The sun beat down mercilessly as Samuel's shovel bit into the hard earth where Rebecca had indicated. 6 feet down, she'd said. 3 hours of digging had produced nothing but sweat and blisters. "Samuel McKinnon, you're a fool to listen to a child about where to dig a well." Martha stood at the edge of the growing hole, handing down a water jug. Her skepticism hadn't prevented her from joining them, bringing water and rags for sweat-soaked brows. "Got any better ideas, Martha? We've nothing to lose but time." Samuel wiped his forehead, leaving a streak of dirt across weathered skin. Rebecca stood quietly nearby, watching the excavation with the same calculating gaze she applied to everything. She hadn't offered to help with the digging, Not her place, but her eyes tracked every shovelful with mathematical precision. 3 more feet, sir, she said suddenly. Samuel paused, leaning on his shovel. You sound mighty certain. Soil's changing. Darker. Moisture increasing. Martha scoffed, but her eyes studied the girl with newfound intensity. The child spoke like no 14-year-old she'd ever encountered, precise, observant, almost academic in her assessments. Samuel resumed digging with renewed vigor. 2 feet further down, his shovel struck something solid. Damn limestone, he muttered. Try left edge, sir. Rebecca pointed. Fracture line. Samuel shifted, driving the shovel hard against the left side of the rocky shelf. The tool punched through suddenly, and water gushed upward, splashing his boots. God almighty, girl! Samuel laughed in astonished relief. How did you know? Rebecca's expression remained neutral, though something almost like pride flickered briefly in her eyes. Patterns, sir. Land tells stories if you know how to listen. The moment of shared triumph was interrupted by the distant sound of hoofbeats. Sheriff Townsend appeared on the horizon, riding toward the ranch house with an envelope in hand. And the evening sun cast long shadows across the ranch as Sheriff Townsend's horse snorted and stamped in the yard. Rebecca had retreated to the porch corner, seemingly engaged in mending but missing nothing of the conversation between the adults. Mail from county seat, Sheriff Townsend said, handing Samuel an envelope. And a word of caution. Samuel wiped his hands on his trousers before accepting the letter. What kind of caution? Stranger in town asking questions. Townsend's eyes flickered toward Rebecca. About a girl purchased at Freeman's auction house in Galveston. Martha's hand instinctively moved toward Rebecca, stopping just short of touching her shoulder. What sort of stranger? Well-dressed, Eastern manner, carrying papers. The sheriff shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. Said he represents a Mr. Wardell. Rebecca's fingers tightened imperceptibly on the shirt she was mending, though her expression remained unchanged. The conversation paused as dust rose on the horizon. A rider approached, Joaquin Vega from the neighboring ranch, his distinctive blue bandana visible even at a distance. "Senor McKinnon," Joaquin called as he drew near. "Thought you should know. Men in town asking about the auction in Galveston, about a girl purchased there." Samuel nodded grimly. "Sheriff was just telling us. One mentioned working for a man named Wardell," Joaquin continued, removing his hat respectfully as he nodded to Martha. "They didn't look like men who take no for an answer. Elias Wardell, labor broker from East Texas." All eyes turned to Rebecca, who had spoken from the doorway, her voice flat and factual. "You know this man?" Martha asked. "He's owned me twice before, sells the same children repeatedly." Rebecca's methodical gaze moved between the adults. Claims runaway status, reclaims, resells. Profitable system. The adults exchanged troubled glances as Rebecca continued mending, her stitches neat and precise as her words. Lantern light cast amber shadows across the ranch house as Samuel checked his Winchester rifle. Outside, night had fallen completely, the vast Texas sky pricked with stars, offering no comfort against what morning might bring. "Martha, you take the back window. Rebecca stays in the root cellar until it's over." Samuel worked the rifle's action, the metallic click echoing in the quiet room. Rebecca, who had been arranging furniture without being asked, paused. "Better positioning by chimney corner, sir. Wider field of fire, but harder target." Samuel lowered his rifle, studying her with surprise. "You know about defensive positions?" "Third owner tried taking me back after selling me. I watched his ranch hands prepare." Rebecca moved a heavy oak table to create a barricade with a narrow gap. They use similar cover. Martha came from the bedroom, a small Derringer pistol in her hand. Her eyes met Samuel's, a silent conversation passing between them, fear, resolve, and something new, determination focused on the girl arranging their defense. "She stays with me, Samuel. I'll keep her safe." Martha's voice carried a steel edge Samuel hadn't heard in years. Rebecca glanced between them, making rapid calculations visible only in the slight movement of her eyes. "Mr. Wardell doesn't come himself first time. Sends men with papers. 3 usually." "Papers don't mean much out here," Samuel said grimly. "They know that, sir. Papers are just the beginning. Show of legitimacy." Rebecca positioned a lantern where it would cast shadows without illuminating defenders. If that fails, they use other methods. Samuel watched her precise movements, the girl's quiet competence more unsettling than panic would have been. "You've seen this before?" Rebecca nodded once. "Twice." Martha moved to Rebecca's side, checking the Derringer. "Well, they'll find something different this time." As if in answer, dogs began barking in the distance. They came at first light, 3 men on horseback, their approach deliberate, unhurried. The leader wore a suit despite the dust, the others flanking him in rough trail clothes with visible sidearms. Samuel stood on the porch, rifle held casually but ready. Martha remained inside at the reinforced window, Rebecca positioned beside her behind the oak barricade. "Morning, gentlemen," Samuel called as they drew near. "Bit early for social calls." The suited man smiled thinly, producing a leather folio. "Nothing social about our business, Mr. McKinnon. I represent Mr. Elias Wardell, legal guardian of Rebecca Doyle. These papers establish his prior claim." Samuel didn't reach for the documents. "I have a bill of sale, fair and legal. Mr. Wardell's guardianship predates any sale. The girl is his ward, not property to be sold." The man's pleasant tone belied the coldness in his eyes. A simple misunderstanding, easily rectified. "Rebecca's not going anywhere," Martha called from inside. The suited man sighed, as if disappointed by their unreasonableness. "We're authorized to retrieve her by any means necessary." His hand moved casually toward his coat. The movement froze as Samuel's rifle rose smoothly to his shoulder. That would be unwise. The standoff stretched, broken, when one of the men spurred his horse suddenly toward the side of the house. Samuel swung his rifle to track him, giving the suited man opportunity to draw his own weapon. The blast of Martha's Derringer cracked through the morning air, splintering wood near the suited man's head. He ducked instinctively, cursing. Chaos erupted. The third man lunged from his horse toward the porch, while his companions provided covering fire. Samuel fired, missing in his haste to avoid hitting the horses. Inside, the side rider smashed through a window. Martha struggled with him, the Derringer empty. Rebecca moved with startling efficiency, bringing a cast-iron skillet down on the intruder's head with a dull thud. "Martha!" Samuel's desperate shout came from outside. "We're all right," Martha called back, her voice steady, despite her trembling hands. The suited man's voice carried clearly. "This isn't over, McKinnon. Next time we'll bring more than papers." 3 horses galloped away, leaving only dust and shattered glass in their wake. Sheriff Townsend arrived an hour after the attackers fled, summoned by Joaquin, who'd heard the gunfire from his property. The intruder Rebecca had struck was bound in the barn, nursing a spectacular headache and refusing to speak. "This complicates matters," Townsend said, examining the falsified guardianship papers the suited man had dropped. "These look mighty official." Samuel stood with arms crossed. "They're forgeries. Has to be." "Maybe so. But Wardell's filed papers in county court claiming legal guardianship. Says you're harboring his ward." The sheriff looked uncomfortable. "You'll need to appear before Judge Parker next week." "For what? Defending our home against armed intruders?" Martha's voice cracked with indignation. She'd been unshakable during the attack, but now trembled with delayed shock. Rebecca stood slightly behind Martha, silent until now. "Wardell isn't my guardian. My parents died in Galveston fever outbreak. He forges papers for orphans, sells us, then reclaims us as runaways." "That's a serious accusation, girl," Townsend said carefully. "She's staying with us, Sheriff, whatever it takes." Martha placed a protective hand on Rebecca's shoulder, surprising both the girl and herself with the gesture. The sheriff sighed, replacing his hat. "Court's in session Tuesday in Fremont. I'd suggest bringing any documentation you have, and witnesses who might speak to the girl's welfare." As Townsend rode away with the prisoner, Samuel studied the distant horizon. "He'll be back, won't he?" Martha asked quietly. Rebecca nodded, her eyes calculating distances and possibilities. "Yes, ma'am, but next time the battle will be in a courtroom." The wagon creaked over rutted trails toward Fremont, the county seat. 2 days of travel had worn lines of anxiety into Martha's face, while Samuel's jaw remained permanently clenched. Only Rebecca maintained outward calm, though her fingers constantly moved, counting fence posts, calculating distances, measuring time. "Almost there," Samuel announced as the town's church steeple appeared on the horizon. "Rebecca, remember what we discussed?" "Yes, sir." "Answer questions directly. Speak clearly. Tell the truth about my parents and Mr. Wardell." Her voice was steady, but Martha noticed how the girl's hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Judge Parker is fair, but he respects the law above all," Samuel continued. "These guardianship papers Wardell's filed. They may look convincing." The town materialized before them, a collection of wooden buildings flanking a wide main street, dominated by the brick courthouse at its center. People turned to watch their wagon pass, curiosity and judgment in equal measure on their faces. They found Jeremy Collins, the lawyer Samuel had telegraphed ahead to engage, waiting on the courthouse steps. His young face did little to inspire confidence. "Mr. McKinnon," Collins greeted them, hat in hand, "I've reviewed the situation." "And?" Martha prompted when he hesitated. Collins lowered his voice. "Wardell has connections throughout the county. Judge Parker does business with him." "But we have a legal bill of sale," Samuel insisted. "And he has guardianship papers and witnesses willing to swear to their validity." Rebecca's whisper was barely audible. "They always win. The men with papers." Martha's hand found Rebecca's shoulder. "Not this time." The courtroom stood silent as Elias Wardell took the stand. He cut an imposing figure, tall, immaculately dressed, with silver at his temples and a practiced smile that never reached his eyes. Rebecca sat between the McKinnons, her face carefully blank, though Martha felt the girl's shoulder tense beneath her hand. "Mr. Wardell," Judge Parker began, "please explain your relationship to the child in question." "Certainly, Your Honor." Wardell's voice carried the refined accent of Eastern education. "I've been Rebecca's legal guardian since her parents' tragic passing in '82. The Doyles were employees of mine, good people. Their dying wish was for their daughter's care." Rebecca's fingers twitched, counting something only she could see. "And how did she come to be at the auction house?" the judge continued. "A misunderstanding." Wardell's expression conveyed appropriate regret. "I placed her with several families for her education and welfare, maintaining my guardianship throughout. The Palmer family was to return her to my care after her service contract. Instead, they misrepresented my ward as available for a new labor contract." Samuel's attorney rose to object, but Wardell continued smoothly. I have affidavits from 3 previous families attesting to my ongoing guardianship, Your Honor, and documentation of regular inspections of her welfare. He produced a leather portfolio filled with official-looking papers. He sold me to the Palmers himself for $30, Rebecca whispered to Martha, voice flat but eyes burning with quiet rage. Judge Parker examined the documents, nodding thoughtfully. These appear in order, Mr. Wardell. In the gallery, townspeople murmured. Most seemed inclined to believe the well-spoken gentleman over a rancher and his purchased child. Your Honor, Samuel's young lawyer began nervously, my clients have evidence that Mr. Wardell operates a child trafficking operation disguised as guardianship. Wardell's smile remained unchanged, but his eyes hardened to flint. A desperate accusation from people attempting to retain unpaid labor, Your Honor. The courtroom doors opened, drawing all eyes to the entrance. Abigail Wilson, the schoolteacher from Fremont, walked purposefully down the aisle. Behind her came Madeline Parker from the general store, followed by 3 ranchers from neighboring properties, including Joaquin Vega. Your Honor, Abigail announced without preamble, I request permission to provide testimony regarding Rebecca Doyle. Judge Parker blinked in surprise. Miss Wilson, this is an irregular interruption. It concerns a child's welfare, Your Honor. Surely that warrants being heard. The judge hesitated, then nodded. Very well. What information do you bring? Abigail approached the stand, her posture schoolteacher straight. I tested Rebecca's mathematical abilities yesterday when the McKinnons arrived in town. She performs calculations at a level beyond many adults, certainly beyond what would have been possible without dedicated education. Your point, Miss Wilson? The judge appeared perplexed. Mr. Wardell claims to have provided for her education. Yet she states she learned mathematics by calculating auction prices for other children. Her knowledge comes despite his care, not because of it. Wardell's composed expression flickered briefly before resuming its pleasant mask. Children often misremember their education, Your Honor. Madeline Parker stepped forward next. I've seen the difference in Martha McKinnon since the girl came. First time in years, she's had purpose in her step. One by one, the witnesses spoke. Joaquin describing Rebecca's knowledge of ranch operations. The town doctor noting her improved health since joining the McKinnons. Even Sheriff Townsend reluctantly confirming the attack on the ranch by Wardell's men. The gallery's mood shifted palpably. Whispers circulated about other children placed by Wardell in surrounding counties, about suspicious documentation, about a system that valued papers over people. Judge Parker rapped his gavel for silence. Mr. Wardell, these testimonies raise concerning questions. Hearsay and sentiment, Your Honor, Wardell responded smoothly. My legal standing remains clear. Rebecca stood suddenly. May I speak, Your Honor? The courtroom stilled. The judge studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Proceed, child. I am not Mr. Wardell's ward, she began, her clear voice carrying to every corner of the silent room. I can prove it. My parents were Jonas and Mary Doyle, Rebecca stated, standing straight before the judge. They died of fever in Galveston in 1883, not 1882. I was taken to Freeman's auction house 3 days later. She reached into her pocket, producing a small, worn Bible. This belonged to my mother. The family record shows my birth and their deaths. Judge Parker examined the Bible carefully, comparing dates to Wardell's documents. His expression grew troubled. Furthermore, Rebecca continued with mathematical precision, Mr. Wardell claims guardianship since 1882 with regular welfare visits. If the court examines his travel records and business ledgers, they'll find this impossible. He was in New Orleans from January to March 1883, when my parents died, according to his own business announcements in the Galveston Daily News. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Wardell's confident smile had frozen in place. I calculate he's sold me 4 times in total, Your Honor, each time claiming I ran away from proper placement, then charging the next buyer for my labor contract. Rebecca's voice remained steady, factual. At least 17 other children are currently in his system. Judge Parker removed his spectacles, polishing them slowly. These are extraordinary claims, young lady. Based on mathematics, sir. Mr. Wardell keeps precise records. His ledger will show everything. The judge deliberated for long moments before speaking. Based on discrepancies in documentation and community testimony, I'm ruling temporary guardianship to the McKinnons pending further investigation of Mr. Wardell's claims. Court is adjourned until such investigation is complete. The gavel's bang echoed through the suddenly animated room. Wardell's controlled facade cracked momentarily as he leaned toward Samuel. Enjoy your victory while it lasts, Rancher. I protect my investments. Outside on the courthouse steps, Rebecca's attention was drawn to a waiting carriage. Through its window, she glimpsed small faces, children, watching silently as Wardell strode toward them. The small boy and the girl with red hair, she whispered. I remember them from the holding house in Galveston. Martha followed her gaze, understanding dawning. Rebecca, what are you saying? We won today, but there are others. Rebecca's eyes fixed on the departing carriage. We can't just save me. Rebecca woke instantly, nostrils flaring at the acrid scent of smoke. No gradual transition from sleep to wakefulness, just the sudden, complete alertness that had kept her alive through years of uncertainty. Fire! She called sharply, already moving. Martha! Samuel! Fire in the barn! The ranch house erupted into motion. Samuel bolted from the bedroom, pulling on boots as he ran. Martha grabbed the water bucket by the door, face pale in the orange glow now visible through the windows. Outside, flames licked hungrily at the barn's weathered boards. Inside, horses screamed in terror, their shadows dancing grotesquely against burning walls. Martha, get the water chain started, Samuel shouted, running toward the inferno. Rebecca, help me with the horses. Rebecca was already moving, calculating angles of approach, estimating time before structural collapse. The cattle will stampede if the fire spreads. South side's catching, Martha called, organizing the bucket brigade with neighboring ranch hands who'd spotted the blaze and ridden to help. The irrigation ditch, Rebecca pointed, mind racing through possibilities. We can flood the gap between buildings. Joaquin appeared through the smoke, leading 2 men. We'll divert the water. You get the animals out! The night dissolved into chaos, scorching heat, choking smoke, the frantic work of saving what could be saved. Rebecca moved with mechanical efficiency, leading terrified horses to safety, dragging essential supplies from threatened outbuildings. Dawn revealed the devastation. The main barn stood in smoldering ruins, along with the tool shed and part of the corral. Exhausted defenders slumped where they stood, faces streaked with soot and sweat. Could have been lightning, Joaquin suggested half-heartedly, hat in hand. Samuel shook his head, holding up a charred, kerosene-soaked rag he'd found near the barn door. This wasn't nature's work. Martha looked to Rebecca, who stood silent, studying the destruction with calculating eyes. They all knew who had sent this message of retribution. The ranch house stood quiet in the gray light of early morning. The McKinnons had finally succumbed to exhaustion after the night's battle, sleeping the heavy sleep of the physically and emotionally drained. Rebecca moved silently through her small room, packing her meager possessions: a spare dress, a carved wooden horse Samuel had given her, the Bible containing her family's records. Her movements were precise, methodical, each item carefully considered for essential value. On a scrap of paper, her neat handwriting formed deliberate words. "Mr. and Mrs. McKinnon, thank you for your kindness. Wardell will not stop until he reclaims me or destroys you. I cannot allow the second option. I have taken nothing but what I brought. Rebecca." She placed the note on her neatly made bed, then shouldered her small bundle. The calculation was simple, really. Her presence endangered the McKinnons. Her absence removed the immediate threat. The equation balanced. Rebecca paused at the door to the main room, allowing herself one final look at the home that had briefly felt like something more than a temporary placement. The McKinnons had defended her, believed her, risked everything for her, and Wardell had nearly burned them out in return. The next attack would be worse. That was the pattern, the predictable progression. She turned toward the door, only to find Martha standing in the threshold, arms crossed, eyes red-rimmed from smoke and lack of sleep. "And where exactly do you think you're going?" Martha asked, voice quiet but firm. Rebecca clutched her bundle tighter. "Wardell burned your barn because of me. Next time, it could be the house, or worse. So your answer is to run, to let him win?" "My answer is to keep you safe," Rebecca replied, the logic irrefutable in her mind. Martha's eyes softened, seeing not the calculating survivor, but the wounded child beneath. "That's not your responsibility, Rebecca." The kitchen smelled of coffee and wood smoke, the morning light catching dust motes that danced between Rebecca and Martha as they sat across from each other at the worn table. Samuel still slept, exhaustion having claimed him completely after the night's ordeal. "I was sold too," Martha said suddenly, her fingers turning the wedding band on her left hand. "Not at auction, but to a neighbor when I was 12. Called it a marriage." Rebecca's eyes widened slightly, the first genuine surprise Martha had seen cross her face. "You were property, just like you." Martha pushed up her sleeve, revealing a thin rope scar circling her wrist, a mirror to Rebecca's own. "Ran away at 16. Found work as a cook until I met Samuel." The kitchen fell silent, save for the ticking of the clock and the distant lowing of cattle. Rebecca studied Martha's face, seeing the woman in a new light, not as owner, but as someone who understood, who had calculated her own odds and survived. "Did you ever stop feeling owned?" Rebecca's question was barely audible. Martha reached across the table, taking Rebecca's hands in hers. "Only when I realized I belonged to myself, and now to the family I choose. I'll bring nothing but trouble." Rebecca's voice remained factual, analytical. "You brought purpose back to this house, to me." Martha's grip tightened. "We fight for family, Rebecca, and you're ours now." Something cracked in Rebecca's carefully constructed facade. Her shoulders trembled once, then again. Martha moved around the table, drawing the girl into the first real embrace either had initiated. Rebecca stiffened momentarily, then collapsed against Martha, 14 years of calculated survival, giving way to something she'd forgotten existed, the simple human need to be held. The moment was broken by Samuel's urgent voice from the doorway. "Sheriff's here. Wardell's bought the mortgage on the Henderson place next door." Martha and Rebecca pulled apart, looking into each other's eyes with new understanding. "Sometimes," Martha said quietly, "you don't choose the fight chooses you." The Fremont courthouse stood bathed in autumn sunlight, its weathered brick facade a stark contrast to the festive atmosphere within. Rebecca, dressed in a new calico dress Martha had stayed up 3 nights to complete, stood between the McKinnons before Judge Parker's bench. 2 weeks had passed since the fire. 2 weeks of rebuilding, of community support that had surprised them all, of watching Wardell's men take possession of the neighboring Henderson property, establishing an outpost of observation and intimidation just beyond their fence line. "Having reviewed the documentation and completed our investigation," Judge Parker announced, adjusting his spectacles, "I find Mr. Wardell's guardianship claims to be fraudulent. Furthermore, evidence suggests a pattern of exploitation that warrants criminal investigation." A murmur rippled through the gathered townspeople. Rebecca remained still, only her eyes moving, tracking reactions, calculating changed probabilities. "Therefore," the judge continued, "by the authority vested in me by the state of Texas, I hereby recognize Rebecca Doyle McKinnon as the legal daughter of Samuel and Martha McKinnon, with all rights and privileges thereof." Samuel's hand came to rest on Rebecca's shoulder, its weight somehow both substantial and gentle. "Welcome to the family, Rebecca McKinnon." Rebecca tested the name silently, feeling its unfamiliar shape. Then her attention shifted to the courthouse window, where a familiar figure observed from across the street. "He's watching," she noted quietly. Martha followed her gaze to where Wardell stood beside his carriage, making notes in his ever-present ledger. "Let him. You're ours now, legally and in every way that matters." As they descended the courthouse steps into the crisp autumn air, Rebecca analyzed the faces of well-wishers offering congratulations. Not just the McKinnons' neighbors now, but hers. Not just temporary allies, but community. The calculation shifted, complex variables resolving into simpler equations. For the first time in years, Rebecca allowed herself to consider a future measured not in days of survival, but in years of belonging. The church meeting room buzzed with urgent conversation as Samuel spread a map across the table. 24 ranchers, shopkeepers, and townspeople leaned forward, faces grave in the lamplight. "Wardell's bought the Henderson place," Samuel began, indicating the property that bordered their ranch. "He's not just coming for Rebecca. He's planning something bigger." Joaquin Vega pointed to marked positions on the map. 3 of his men already moved in, asking questions about water rights, property lines. "He'll use legal means first," Rebecca added, her voice steady and analytical. "Property disputes, water access, then escalate to threats." The gathered neighbors exchanged glances. Rebecca had earned their respect through her mathematical precision and unflinching assessments. When she spoke, they listened. "The school board should know about his so-called guardianship of children," Abigail Wilson suggested. "We can block any attempts to claim authority over children here." Sheriff Townsend shifted uncomfortably. "I can only enforce the law as written, folks." "Then we'll need to make sure the law protects what matters," Martha replied firmly. She had changed in recent weeks, standing straighter, speaking with renewed purpose. The woman who had once turned family portraits face down now organized community defense. Rebecca studied the faces around the table, calculating strengths, weaknesses, reliability factors. These people had come together for her. Now they would stand together against a larger threat. "We've telegraphed the federal marshal, Jeremy Collins," their young lawyer announced. "The evidence Rebecca provided about Wardell's operation has opened an investigation." "But that takes time," Samuel noted grimly. "And Wardell knows it. He'll move before the law does." As if confirming his words, the church door burst open. Young Tommy Wilson, Abigail's brother, stood breathless in the doorway. "Riders, coming from the Henderson place," he gasped. "And they've got children with them, 4, maybe 5. Look like they've been traveling hard." The McKinnon ranch house stood illuminated by a single lantern, its warm light spilling across the porch where Rebecca waited. Behind her, Martha prepared beds while Samuel and Joaquin kept watch from the barn's remains. The approaching figures materialized from the darkness, 2 children leading 3 smaller ones, all moving with the furtive caution of those accustomed to pursuit. "You're the girl who got away," the oldest, a boy of perhaps 12, called softly as they neared the fence line. "The one they talk about." Rebecca moved down the steps, maintaining precisely the unthreatening distance she would have wanted herself. "What's your name?" "James. This is my sister Emma." He gestured to a thin girl beside him. "The little ones are from the Henderson place. They brought us there yesterday." "How did you escape?" Rebecca asked, conducting a swift assessment of their condition, exhausted, underfed, but moving under their own power. "They got careless, too busy setting up." James straightened, attempting dignity despite his ragged appearance. "Emma heard them talking about you. How you caused trouble, how you were with people who helped." Martha appeared on the porch, carefully balancing her approach. "There's food inside, and beds." The children hesitated, exchanging glances of habitual suspicion. Rebecca recognized the calculation in their eyes, weighing risk against desperate need. "I was you," she said simply. "3 weeks ago, the McKinnons purchased me at auction. They never treated me as property. Now I'm their daughter by law." The youngest child, barely more than a toddler, swayed with exhaustion. Emma caught her before she could fall. "We can't go back," James said, the slight quaver in his voice betraying his fear. "You won't," Martha promised, descending the steps to gather the smallest child in her arms. The moment of decision was interrupted by Samuel's urgent whistle from the barn. In the distance, lanterns appeared, moving rapidly toward the ranch from the Henderson property. 20 riders, Joaquin reported, joining them quickly. Wardell's leading them. Dawn broke over the McKinnon ranch, painting the sky in streaks of pink and gold that belied the tension below. The house stood as a fortress, windows boarded, defenders positioned at strategic points. Children huddled in the root cellar beneath the kitchen, the youngest ones whimpering softly until Emma shushed them with practiced authority. Rebecca moved between positions, her calculations now devoted to angles of fire, ammunition distribution, defensive strengths, no longer merely surviving, but protecting. "Riders approaching the north fence," Joaquin called from his position at the upper window. 20 men, heavily armed. Samuel checked his rifle one last time. "Remember, we hold until the marshal arrives, 2 hours, maybe 3. The defenders, neighboring ranchers, townspeople who'd arrived throughout the night, even Sheriff Townsend with his grudging sense of justice, nodded grimly. This was no longer about one girl, but about a community choosing its values. "They're stopping," Martha reported, peering through a crack in the barricaded window. "Wardell's coming forward alone." Rebecca joined her, studying the approaching figure with analytical detachment. Elias Wardell sat his horse with the confidence of a man accustomed to power, his fine suit incongruous against the backdrop of armed men behind him. "Samuel McKinnon!" Wardell's voice carried clearly across the morning air. "This needn't become unpleasant. Return my property, and we'll depart peacefully." "There's no property here, Wardell," Samuel called back. "Only free people protected by law." "The law is what men with power say it is," Wardell replied, his refined tones carrying an edge of steel. I've invested considerably in my merchandise, and I don't appreciate interference in my business affairs." "Your business is trafficking children," Martha shouted, her voice strong with righteous anger. "It ends today." Wardell's polite mask slipped momentarily, revealing the cold calculation beneath. "I've built my operation across 3 states, Mrs. McKinnon. You think your little ranch can stop what dozens of officials have sanctioned? I own judges, sheriffs, politicians, people who understand business." Rebecca stepped onto the porch, standing straight in the morning light. "You don't own me anymore," she called, her voice carrying the precision of absolute certainty. "And you won't own them either." The standoff stretched across hours, sun climbing higher, tension mounting with the heat. Twice, Wardell's men attempted to circle behind the ranch, only to find Joaquin and other neighbors positioned to intercept them. A few warning shots kept the distance, but ammunition was limited, and everyone knew it. "Marshals delayed at the river crossing," Sheriff Townsend reported grimly after a rider brought news. "Flash flood from yesterday's rain upstream." Samuel wiped sweat from his brow. "We need to end this before nightfall. They'll have the advantage in darkness." Rebecca, who had been silent for several minutes, suddenly straightened. "I know how to stop him." "Rebecca, no," Martha began, but the girl's expression silenced her protest. "His ledger," Rebecca explained, her voice carrying the precision of a mathematical proof. "Everything's in his ledger, names, dates, transactions. It's his proof of ownership, but also evidence of his crimes." "And?" Samuel asked, recognizing the analytical look that meant Rebecca was several steps ahead in her calculations. "He never lets it out of his sight, except—" She pointed through a crack in the barricade. "Look how he keeps reaching into his saddlebag, checking it. He brought it with him." Martha understood immediately. "If we get that ledger, we have his entire operation," Rebecca finished. "Every child, every sale, every corrupt official." Samuel shook his head. "Too dangerous. We can't risk—" "I wasn't asking permission," Rebecca said quietly. "I was explaining my plan." Before anyone could stop her, she slipped through the back door, circling through the orchard where the defenders had created a blind spot deliberately left unguarded as a potential trap. Martha moved to follow, but Samuel caught her arm. "Wait," he whispered. "Look." Rebecca emerged from the trees directly behind Wardell's position, moving with the silent efficiency of someone who had spent years avoiding notice. The men's attention was fixed on the house, never considering a flanking maneuver from a mere girl. With precise timing, Rebecca reached Wardell's horse, extracted the leather-bound ledger from his saddlebag, and was halfway back to cover before a shout went up. "The girl! She's got the book!" Chaos erupted. Shots fired wildly as Rebecca darted between trees, clutching the ledger to her chest like the treasure it was. 16 years later, 1903. The sign at the entrance arch read, "McKinnon Ranch for Children," its freshly painted letters bright against weathered wood. Beyond stretched a thriving operation, orchards heavy with fruit, fields of cattle tended by young riders, dormitory buildings surrounding the original ranch house. Rebecca McKinnon, now 30 years old, stood on the porch watching the afternoon riding lesson in the corral. 43 children currently called the ranch home, with dozens more grown and gone to lives they'd built themselves. "New arrival coming up the drive," Martha called from inside, her hair now streaked with silver, but her step still purposeful. A wagon approached, driven by Sheriff Collins, young Tommy Wilson, who'd taken the badge after old Townsend retired. Beside him sat a girl of perhaps 10, eyes wary, posture defensive. Rebecca walked down to meet them, calculating the child's needs even before introductions. The girl's eyes widened slightly, recognition flickering across her features. "You're Miss McKinnon," the child whispered, "the one who started it all." Rebecca smiled. "I just helped build what others began." The events of that confrontation 16 years ago had unfolded with the precision of a well-calculated equation. Wardell's ledger had indeed contained everything, his entire operation exposed, leading to federal prosecutions across 3 states. His empire had collapsed, while the McKinnon Ranch transformed, growing into something few could have imagined that desperate summer of 1887. Samuel emerged from the barn, older but straight-backed still, to greet the newcomer. Martha followed with a plate of fresh biscuits, her traditional welcome for each new arrival. "This is your home now," Martha told the girl gently, echoing words she'd first spoken to Rebecca years before. "No one will hurt you here." The girl looked between them with cautious hope, making her own calculations about this unexpected turn in her life. Rebecca recognized that look. She'd worn it herself once, measuring the distance between survival and belonging, between existing and living. "Welcome to the McKinnon miracle," she said softly, "where family is what we choose to build together." "Well, friend, we've traveled quite a journey together through the dusty trails of 1887 Texas, haven't we? If your heart feels a little fuller, and perhaps a little bruised, from witnessing Rebecca's transformation from calculating survivor to fierce protector, know that you're not alone. Telling this story has left its mark on me too, in ways that continue to unfold like the Texas horizon at dawn. There's something about the frontier that strips away pretense, leaving only the raw truth of who we really are when tested. The McKinnons began their story desperately clinging to a failing ranch, their marriage as barren as their land. Rebecca calculated her worth only in terms of survival, taught by cruel experience that people were either owners or property. Yet what unfolded wasn't just about saving a ranch or even saving a child. It was about discovering that family isn't always what we're born into, but what we choose to build together. What struck me most while crafting this tale was how transformation rarely happens in isolation. Samuel's impulsive act of compassion awakened Martha's dormant maternal strength. Rebecca's brilliant mind found purpose beyond mere survival. Even Wardell, in his cruel manipulation of vulnerable children, inadvertently created the circumstances for his own downfall and the birth of something beautiful. Sometimes our greatest wounds become the foundation for our most meaningful legacy. The McKinnon miracle speaks to something timeless that transcends its historical setting. We all face moments when taking a stand costs more than we think we can bear. We all encounter wounded souls whose trust has been shattered by betrayal. And we all have the capacity to create family bonds that defy conventional boundaries. Perhaps that's why Rebecca's journey feels so personal, because in her calculations of risk and trust, we see our own cautious hearts learning to believe again. What began as a desperate $50 purchase to save a failing ranch became a 16-year transformation that saved countless children and healed deep wounds. The McKinnons and Rebecca discovered that second chances aren't just given, they're built, choice by choice, day by day, with every act of courage and compassion. Thank you for walking this path alongside Rebecca and the McKinnons. Stories only truly live when they find hearts willing to ride alongside flawed characters seeking redemption. At your willingness to journey from that Galveston auction house to the thriving McKinnon Ranch for Children is what transforms these words into something that matters beyond the page. Rebecca's story has me thinking about the families we choose and the walls we build to protect ourselves from past hurts. We all calculate risks in our relationships, weighing vulnerability against the possibility of betrayal. What unlikely connection in your life transformed from transaction to genuine bond? What walls did you have to tear down to let someone in? Share your experience in the comments, because chosen family deserves to be celebrated, whether it formed on the frontier or in your own neighborhood. If the McKinnon miracle stirred something in your heart about second chances and the families we build by choice, I'd be grateful if you'd hit that like button and consider subscribing. The West is full of stories about ordinary people creating extraordinary legacies through courage and compassion, and I'd be honored to share more of them with you. Until next time, may you find family in unexpected places, and may you become someone's miracle when they need it most.